They called her Outlaw, though she had stolen nothing but breath. Her name was Clara Rains, daughter of a cattle hand and a mother who died in childbirth, raised among dust and fences. By the time she was 20, Clara's shoulders carried more weight than most men twice her age, mending wire in storms, branding calves with smoke biting her eyes, pulling lambs from ewes slick with blood. But the town of Bitter Creek never forgave her one thing, her refusal to bow. Years back, when a rancher's son cornered her in the hayloft, she broke his nose with the blunt of a branding iron. He swore she seduced him, and the town chose to believe him. From then on, Clara was unfit, wild, unwomanly. The church women crossed streets when she walked. The blacksmith's boy spat near her boots. Children repeated what their parents whispered, outlaw girl, no man will have her. Her shame was visible, bound tight around her like the rope she found tossed outside her door one morning. A coil of lariat, stained dark where hands had pulled too hard. A warning, a curse, a reminder. She kept it hidden in her trunk, yet she touched it sometimes, just to remind herself what they thought she was. Still, Clara worked the small patch of land her father left, though the soil gave more stone than grain. Nights, she sat by a dying fire, her palms cracked, her body aching, her heart hollow but not broken. It was on such a night, stars sharp as nails overhead, coyotes yipping in the gulch, that the rider came. A horse stumbled to her fence line, snorting, foam crusting its bit. The man on its back swayed, hat shadowing his face, one hand pressed against his ribs. Blood stained his duster. Clara stepped out, lantern lifted, and the light fell on him, scar down his cheek, eyes gray like gunmetal, jaw set against pain. "Ma'am," he rasped, sliding from the saddle before she could answer, "don't mean to trespass. Just, need ground to bleed on." He crumpled into her dust yard, the horse trembling beside him. Clara set down the lantern, her breath caught between fear and something else she didn't yet have a name for. The stranger lay in the dust, breath ragged, one hand clamped to his ribs. The lantern light showed crimson blooming through his coat like wildfire through dry grass. Clara's first thought was to let him lie. Bitter Creek would damn her if she nursed a man, especially one whose boots and scars screamed trouble. She could already hear the whispers, "Outlaw girl harbors outlaw men." But his horse, ribs heaving, eyes rolling white, pressed its muzzle into her shoulder as if pleading. The beast wouldn't leave him. Clara cursed under her breath, hefted the man's arm across her shoulders, and half-dragged him into her crooked house. He was heavy as wet hay, his breath hot against her neck. By the time she dropped him on her cot, her arms shook like reeds in floodwater. She cut away his coat with the same knife she used for butchering goats. The wound was deep, a bullet lodged in muscle, black around the edges. Not fresh, but not yet fatal. He stirred, eyes flicking open. "You should, leave me be," he muttered. "Ain't no salvation in holdin' a man like me." Clara's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask the town's permission, and I won't ask yours." She heated water, tore strips from her only decent dress for bandages, and dug out the slug with steady fingers though her stomach churned. He groaned low, but did not fight her. When it was done, she stitched him shut with needle and thread kept for mending trousers. His skin shivered under her touch, and she felt her own hands tremble, though she hid it well. By dawn, the bleeding slowed. He lay still, sweat shining on his brow. She sat across the room, arms folded tight, watching him breathe. For the first time in years, Clara felt the house was not empty. The house smelled of boiled water and old wood. Outside, coyotes yipped and the wind carried grit against the shutters, but inside there was only the faint rasp of his breathing. Clara sat in her chair, arms crossed against her chest, watching him in the cot. She told herself she would stay awake to make sure the bleeding didn't start again, but the truth was she didn't trust him yet. Strangers in Bitter Creek had a way of bringing trouble, and men with scars on their faces usually carried more than one kind. At length, he stirred, opening his eyes slow. The lantern still burned low, and in its glow his gaze found her. "You should have left me in the yard," he murmured, voice gravel scraping through a dry throat. "Would've," she said, "if your horse hadn't begged me otherwise." That coaxed the faintest crook of a smile from him. "She don't beg easy. Name's Ada." Clara tilted her head, studying the animal through the open doorway. The mare stood, waiting, as if the night itself had been nailed in place around her. "And you?" she asked after a pause. "Jonas," he said, wincing as he shifted. Jonas Hale. She weighed the name, testing how it sat in her mouth. Soldier. Was, he replied. Now just a man looking for quiet ground. His eyes flicked toward her, gray and steady. And you? Clara, she said simply. The silence between them was long but not empty. It hummed like the pause between two notes on a fiddle string, stretched but holding. At last Jonas spoke again, softer. Why'd you bother patching me? Clara's hands curled tight in her lap. Because the town already calls me outlaw. Might as well give Em a reason. His eyes lingered on her then, not the quick, hungry glance of men in Bitter Creek, but something slower, like a man weighing the shape of a truth he hadn't known until now. The house slept heavy with silence. Jonas dozed, his chest rising slow under the stitches she'd set. Clara moved about with careful steps, setting water to heat, folding the torn strips of cloth she'd used. When she went to fetch a fresh blanket from her trunk, the lid creaked louder than she meant it to. Jonas stirred, half opening his eyes. She froze, the blanket in her hands, and beside it, the rope. Coiled tight, stiff with age, brown with stains no scrubbing had lifted. The lantern's glow caught it, throwing a shadow on the wall like a noose. Jonas's gaze sharpened. His voice was soft but steady. That yours? Clara shut the lid fast, but the sound was already loose in the room. She pressed the blanket to her chest, jaw set. It's nothing. Don't look like nothing, he said. Her throat worked before words came. It's all they left me. My husband took it to the rafters. The town left it at my door when he was buried. Told me to wear it like a badge. The words left her raw. She hadn't spoken them aloud in years. Jonas shifted, wincing, but his eyes didn't flinch. Rope can bind or break. Depends whose hand holds it. Clara's fingers clenched the blanket until her knuckles ached. It's shame, plain and simple. He let the silence sit a long while, then said, or it's proof you outlived what tried to hang you. Clara looked at him then, really looked, and saw the scar on his cheek in a different light. Not just ruin, but survival carved deep. Her breath shook, and she turned away quick, tossing the blanket across him harder than she meant. But in the shadows, the rope waited in the trunk, no longer just a curse, but a question. Days passed. The bullet wound closed in on itself, though Jonas still moved like every step pulled a stitch loose. Clara tended him in silence, her hands steady, her voice spare. But silence, when shared long enough, begins to loosen its grip. One night, when the fire burned low and the coyotes howled their long sorrows through the gulch, Jonas sat propped against the wall, the blanket drawn around him. Clara mended her torn work shirt by lantern light, needle flashing. Scar on your cheek, she said without looking up. Bullet. He touched it absently. Saber. Virginia Field. Thought I wouldn't wake. Woke anyway. Clara's fingers paused on the thread. And the leg. Horse rolled, Shiloh. Left me limpin' since. His gaze followed her hands. You wear scars too, though none show. She didn't answer, but the needle slowed. The rope in the trunk seemed to weigh heavier in the room, though its lid was closed. Jonas's voice softened. Folks carve you with words same as steel. Sometimes deeper. Clara tied off the stitch, set the shirt down, and met his eyes at last. They call me outlaw. Not because I stole or killed, but because I wouldn't bow. I reckon that's enough. He nodded, a slow, grave thing. Outlaws ain't always the ones ridin' with guns. Sometimes it's the souls that refuse to kneel. The fire cracked, throwing sparks against the dark. For the first time, Clara didn't feel the room was crowded with ghosts. She poured him water, their fingers brushing when she passed the cup. Both drew back quick, but the air between them had changed. It carried not only survival, but the first raw ache of trust. By the end of the week, Bitter Creek had noticed. Clara kept Jonas inside, but men in town were like coyotes, they sniffed out weakness quick. A stranger's horse at her fence, his boots drying by her door, the smoke rising longer from her chimney than usual. Whispers sharpened into barbs. She's got herself a gunman hid out. Figures the outlaw girl would warm a bed for trash. Someone ought to pay her a visit, remind her place. On the second Sunday after Jonas stumbled to her yard, Clara rode in for flour and lamp oil. The boardwalk went quiet when her boots hit the planks. The church ladies pulled their shawls tighter. Boys leaned against the hitch rail, snickering. Sheriff Dunn, gray in the beard and stiff in the back, tipped his hat only halfway. His eyes slid toward the sack she carried, then toward the mare tied at her post. "Runnin' quite a home out there, Clara," he said in a voice meant for all to hear. "Some say you've found yourself company." Clara met his gaze, steady as stone. "Some say too much, Sheriff. You'll have to decide which words you believe." The crowd chuckled low, a sound not of humor but of hunger. When she rode back, Jonas was splitting kindling, pale but upright. She slid from her saddle with a stiff jaw. "Town's talkin'," she told him. He set the axe down slow. "They'll come, then." Her stomach twisted. "If they do, they'll find me standin'. Jonas's eyes searched hers, not with pity, but with a kind of rough respect. "You've stood alone a long time. But if they come, you won't stand alone anymore." The wind picked up through the cottonwoods, rattling the leaves like bones. Clara thought of the rope in the trunk, waiting, watching. For the first time, she wondered if it might yet change its meaning. That night the wind scoured Bitter Creek, shrieking through broken fences and rattling loose tin. Jonas sat near the hearth, his bad legs stretched out, whittling a scrap of cedar. Clara mended a torn hem, her eyes darting now and then to the window as if the town itself might march through the dark. The fire hissed when a log shifted, throwing sparks that painted her face in copper light. Jonas set down his knife. "You always been this stubborn?" he asked, not mocking but curious. Clara smirked faintly. "Stubborn keeps a body alive." She tied off her thread and blew out the flame of her needlework candle. "What about you? You look like a man who's outrun too much." He leaned back, fingers tracing the scar on his cheek. "Ain't outrun it. Just learned to carry it quiet." For a long while, only the fire spoke. Then Jonas reached for a log, but his hand shook. Clara noticed before he could hide it. She moved close, steadying his wrist as she set the wood herself. Their hands touched longer than either meant. His skin was calloused, rough with years of rains and rifles, yet warm. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the strange ache of being touched with care instead of suspicion. Jonas did not pull away quick, nor did he press. He just let her hand linger, as if giving her the choice. Clara swallowed, pulled back, and busied herself with the kettle. But her breath betrayed her, shallow, uneven. Behind her, Jonas's voice came low. "I don't reckon you're half as outlaw as they say. Or maybe you are, and maybe that's what this world needs." The fire cracked, shadows swaying across the walls. Clara turned, lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she placed the kettle on the hook, her hands still trembling, and sat again across from him. The silence stretched, but it no longer felt empty. By mid-morning, hoofbeats came slow up Clara's lane. Sheriff Dunn sat his bay horse like a man who carried the whole town's judgment in his saddlebag. Dust rose behind him, curling into the sky like smoke from a fuse. Jonas was chopping wood with one arm steadying his ribs, sweat streaking his temple. Clara felt her stomach knot when the sheriff reined in at the fence. "Morning, Clara," Dunn called, tipping his hat only part way. His eyes slid to Jonas, then back to her. "Heard tell you've got company." Words spreading faster than wildfire in dry grass. Clara wiped her hands on her skirt, chin high. "He's a wounded man. Needed help." Dunn's mouth twitched. "A man like that don't just stumble into Bitter Creek without reason. You patch him, you own his sins too. You ready for that weight?" Jonas leaned on the axe, breathing hard but standing firm. "Ain't her sins, Sheriff. They're mine. And I'll carry them." The sheriff studied him long, then spat into the dirt. "Maybe so. But this town don't take kindly to strays. Next time I ride out, it won't be words I'm bringin'. He tugged his reins, turned the bay, and rode back down the lane. The silence he left behind was heavier than gunpowder. Clara glanced at Jonas. His scar caught the light, his jaw set. "They'll come for you," she said. His gaze didn't falter. "They'll come for us. The firewood cracked under his hand as he split another log, though his stitches threatened to tear. And Clara, for the first time in years, felt a strange warmth bloom in her chest, not safety, but the fragile beginning of not being alone. The sheriff's warning lingered like smoke in the rafters. Clara barely slept. She rose at every sound, the creak of a fence post, the groan of the wind, Ada's restless stamping in the yard. Jonas noticed. He always did. One night, she sat by the hearth long after the fire should have been left to embers. Her hands worried the hem of her dress until the threads loosened. Jonas, pale from his wound, eased himself into the chair opposite her. "You'll tear it clean through," he said, voice quiet as the crackle of the flames. Clara stilled her hands but didn't meet his gaze. "Can't mend the rope in my chest as easy." Jonas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You've carried their words long enough. Maybe let someone else shoulder a piece." Her eyes snapped to his, sharp with the reflex of surviving alone too long. But there was no pity in his gaze, only a quiet steadiness, the kind that held weight without pressing. The fire popped. Heat pressed against her cheeks. For a heartbeat, she leaned forward. Their faces close, her breath caught on his. The rope in the trunk, the sheriff's threat, the whole town's scorn, all of it slipped away, leaving only the trembling space between his scarred mouth and hers. But Jonas drew back a fraction, as if restraint were the only mercy he could offer. His hand brushed hers, just once, and lingered there. "Not tonight," he whispered. "Not yet." Clara's throat tightened. She pulled her hand away, though her skin burned where he'd touched. She rose, stoking the fire, forcing her voice steady. "You should rest." Jonas leaned back, eyes closing, but his lips curved with something that might have been hope. And Clara, staring into the blaze, felt the ache of something she had not let herself want in years. The night was still when the sound came, hooves, many of them, grinding up the dry creek bed. Clara froze at the window, lantern dimmed to a glow. Jonas, half-dressed, reached for his rifle though his wound pulled him sideways. "They've come," Clara whispered. Out in the yard, shadows gathered, men with kerchiefs over faces, torches casting fire against the cottonwoods. The sheriff wasn't among them. This was no lawful call. This was Bitter Creek's true voice, fear and hunger for someone to blame. "Outlaw girl," a man shouted. His tone was thick with whiskey and spite. "Send him out, or we'll drag you both." Clara's chest tightened. She saw the rope in her mind, the one coiled in the trunk, the badge of her shame, the town's reminder of what they thought she deserved. For a breath, she felt the old weight of it pressing on her throat. But Jonas's hand came to rest on her arm, steady and warm. His eyes were steel and smoke. "You don't owe them." Her breath shook, but her chin lifted. She pushed open the door and stepped onto the porch. The torches flared, a sea of eyes on her, waiting for fear, for weakness. Jonas limped to her side, rifle in hand, though his body trembled. He stood anyway. "Take another step," Clara said into the dark, voice low but carrying, "and you'll find out just how outlaw I can be." The men shifted, murmurs rolling. No shot came, no rope thrown. Only the uneasy scrape of boots and horses stamping in the dirt. Behind her, the fire in the hearth crackled, throwing a warm glow against their backs. And for the first time, Clara felt the rope in her chest loosen, not gone, but fraying, thread by thread. The mob did not strike that night. They lingered long enough to let their torches scorch the dust, then scattered back toward town. But Clara knew they would return. Inside, Jonas lowered himself into the chair, chest heaving, sweat soaking through his shirt. Clara knelt beside him, pressing a cloth to his wound. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the surge of something she had not let herself feel in years, a need to keep someone safe. When the bleeding steadied, she rose and went to the trunk. For a long while she just stood there, staring at the lid. Jonas's eyes followed her. "What's in there has a hold on you," he said softly. Clara lifted the lid. The rope lay coiled like a serpent, stiff and dark. She carried it to the hearth, her arms trembling with the weight of it, not just leather and hemp, but the years of whispers, the laughter, the way children mimed hanging when she walked by. Jonas reached out, his hand covering hers. "You sure?" Clara looked at the rope. "This thing's been their story of me. Time it became mine." She dropped it into the flames. The fire snapped, flared high, smoke curling bitter into the rafters. For a moment the rope writhed as if alive, then blackened, shrinking in on itself until only glowing strands remained. Clara's face lit with the blaze. Jonas's scar caught the light, and he reached for her hand. She let him. The crowd outside would still come. The town would still curse. But the rope was gone, and in its ashes, something new had begun. The rope was gone, burned to ash, its smoke carried off by the night wind. But danger still prowled the edges of Clara's land. Bitter Creek wasn't finished. She knew sunrise could bring the sheriff, or worse. That night, she sat by the fire with Jonas. His wound had closed enough for him to stand without leaning, though every step was still careful, every breath edged. The flames painted him gold and shadow, scar gleaming like a mark of survival rather than ruin. Clara sat close enough to feel his warmth, though not touching. The silence stretched, heavy with all that had not been said. Finally, her voice broke low, ragged. "If they come tomorrow, it'll be the end of me. They'll call me outlaw till their throats give out. They'll tear this house apart." Jonas turned his head, eyes catching hers. "Then I'll stand beside you. If it's an ending, it won't be yours alone." Her breath caught. For years, she had carried shame like a chain, but never had anyone offered to share its weight. Clara's hands trembled where they lay in her lap. She lifted them slow, resting one on his. His fingers curled around hers, rough and steady. Her voice came barely above a whisper. "Kiss me before dawn." The words startled even her, not plea, not command, but the raw truth of a heart that had waited too long. Jonas's gaze softened, the firelight burning in the gray of his eyes. He leaned in, slow as the turning of seasons, giving her every chance to pull away. When his lips touched hers, it was not desperate or hurried. It was steady, aching, a promise carved in silence. He held her as if forever. Outside, the night waited. Inside, for the first time since Bitter Creek had named her outlaw, Clara felt the name burn away in the heat of another's arms. The first gray light of dawn spilled across the valley, turning Bitter Creek's dust to silver. Clara stirred from the cot, heart pounding as if she had not truly slept at all. Jonas was already awake, sitting at the window with his rifle resting across his lap. His scar caught the morning glow, his shoulders set. "They'll ride again," he said quietly, not turning from the horizon. Clara rose, pulling her shawl tight. "Then let them. Ropes burned. They can't hang me with it no more." Her voice surprised even her, not hard, not defiant, but steady. Jonas turned then, his eyes soft with something that went beyond resolve. He stood, limping but unbowed, and reached into his coat pocket. From it, he drew a small carved piece of cedar, a horse, rough-hewn but true, the grain marked by his knife. "Started whittlin' it the first night," he said, placing it in her palm. His hand lingered over hers, rough skin against rough skin. "Figured if I didn't live through the wound, least you'd have something that came from my hands, not their spite." Clara closed her fingers around it. Her throat tightened. She had carried rope as shame, now she held wood as gift. Outside, a crow cried. The town would not stop hunting. But within the cabin, a fire still smoldered, warm against the cold light. Clara met his gaze. "Whatever they call me, outlaw, cursed, unfit, you'll know my name." Jonas bent, pressing his lips to her forehead, soft as breath. "And I'll carry it." The day began, but in that quiet, they had already chosen survival together. By noon, Bitter Creek gathered again. Hooves and boots churned Clara's lane into dust. Sheriff Dunn rode at the front this time, hat low, jaw set like stone. Behind him came a knot of men, some with rifles, some just with spite. Clara and Jonas stepped onto the porch together. She held no weapon, only the small cedar horse Jonas had carved, hidden in her fist like a talisman. Jonas leaned on his rifle, pale but steady. The sheriff reined in. "Clara Rains," he called. "You've harbored a wanted man. The town demands he be given over." Murmurs rose. Faces hard, eyes hungry. Before Clara could answer, a sound cut the air, high and clear. "Ma." A boy broke from the cluster of townsfolk. Thin, barefoot, maybe 6 years old, clutching a ragged doll. It was the neighbor's orphan, Eli, the one Clara had slipped bread to when his aunt turned him out. He ran past the men and clung to Clara's skirt, burying his face. "Don't let em take you," he sobbed. "Don't let em." The mob shifted, restless. Some spat. Some looked away. The word hung in the air heavier than any rope, "Ma." Jonas stepped forward then, his hand finding Clara's, twining rough fingers with hers for all to see. His scar burned in the sunlight, his grip unshaken. Clara raised her chin. "You call me outlaw. He calls me mother. And this man calls me his." The crowd faltered. Whispers rippled like wine through dry grass. For the first time, Bitter Creek's judgment cracked, not shattered, not gone, but cracked enough to let something truer show through. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He pulled his reins, turned his bay slow. "This ain't over," he said. "But you've made your stand." The men followed, some grumbling, some silent. Dust swallowed them as they rode back toward town. Clara stood, Eli clinging to her, Jonas's hand wrapped tight in hers. The fire in her chest no longer burned as shame, but as proof. Even the crowd could not name her completely. The dust of the mob had settled. Sheriff Dunn hadn't returned. For now, Bitter Creek kept its distance, though the weight of their scorn still pressed at Clara's fences. That evening, Clara and Jonas worked in silence. She watered her goats, he split wood, Eli curled asleep on a pallet by the hearth. The small cedar horse sat on the mantel, the firelight glinting off its rough edges. When the chores were done, Clara stood at the doorway, staring out at the cottonwoods swaying in the dusk. Jonas joined her, his limp steady but sure, his arm brushing hers. "They'll never stop talkin'," she said, voice low. "Let em talk," Jonas answered. A house with firelights louder than a crowd in the dark. She turned to him then, eyes searching. His scar gleamed, his breath warm in the cooling air. Slowly, she reached up, touching the line of ruin on his cheek. He didn't flinch. Her lips brushed the scar, not passion, not hunger, but a vow. To see it not as shame, but as proof of endurance. Jonas's hand came to rest at the small of her back, pulling her close. The world outside would not soften, but in that cabin, flame and shadow wrapped them whole. They buried the last of the rope's ashes in the garden behind the house. Over it, Clara pressed seeds into the earth, not for flowers, but beans and corn. Food enough to live. The crowd might return. The town might never forgive. But the cabin glowed warm, the boy slept safe, and two hands, scarred, calloused, trembling but sure, held fast to each other. They say the outlaw rancher girl begged, "Kiss me before dawn," and the cowboy held her as if forever. And though the town tried to name her cursed, she carried on, planting seed where the rope once lay, firelight shining through a cabin window like a lantern against the desert night. So when folks ask what keeps a heart alive in a place as harsh as Bitter Creek, the story ends with a question: is it a kiss, a scar, or the memory of one hand that never let go?